We're back with another season of Policy Pizza, the show where we take you behind the scenes with the people who make public policy work. Some of the biggest things that affect all our lives are the ideas that end up in front of decision makers in business and government. So how do we get these super smart people to spend a few minutes with us? That's easy. Pizza. Each week, we'll sit down with an expert and find out about some of the most important ideas that are helping to make our world a better place. We're back, and we met up with Donna King, the editor-in-chief of Carolina Journal. Donna gave us a little background on her expertise and why independent journalism is vitally important to public policy discussions.
Yeah, well, I grew up in Raleigh, actually. I went to NC State. I went to St. Mary's. I just feel like I just moved down St. Mary's Street, really.
Yeah.
After I graduated from NC State, I married my husband. We moved to LA, and I worked in a magazine there. And then, we moved back to the DC area where I started working in local television. Moved to Reuters, spent almost a decade at Reuters covering North America for all of our Asian clients.
Okay.
So that way I could be at home with kids during the day and work all night.
Oh, that's perfect.
Yeah, it actually worked out pretty well. But I'm dating myself now. After September 11th, we started making an exit plan to come back to North Carolina. I wanted my kids to grow up here.
It's the best place.
It is, and it's been a fantastic move. I'm so glad we did it. And I came back here and found a real home, I think, here at Carolina Journal. It really blends everything that I love about this business.
Yeah, and specifically, Carolina Journal is focused on state government?
State government primarily, but really we're covering the news that people are finding elsewhere, the stories, but we're really looking at it in a different way. We're looking at it from a free market liberty perspective, and that's just not available in local news. Mm-hmm. You can see it in national news sometimes, and you can certainly see it in blogs and other places. But I think we're also able to bring in the breaking news and who's running for what and how that might influence their current responsibilities in another office.
Cool.
Or how those dynamics of running for office from smaller communities outside of Raleigh. Because I think a lot of people think it's all right here in Raleigh, and it's just not.
Right. The legislature and the governor are here, but the stuff that concerns the whole state of North Carolina is what you guys write about.
Right, and that's what happens. It happens in city council meetings, it happens in school board meetings, it happens in our local communities. Eventually it finds its way to Raleigh, but we have to start there because that's where you really find out what North Carolinians want to know from their news sources, but also what they want from their lawmakers.
Why we really wanted to have you on the show is because without a free press and an active watchdog or just source of information, it's just hard for lawmakers and for just the general public to make any kind of decisions about what they think, right?
Sure. I mean, it would be really easy if the press was always in step with what people wanted and what lawmakers were doing, and that's just not going to happen. But I think that what we're also seeing is that we have a very close relationship with one party and the majority of the big mainstream news in North Carolina. So they have a relationship that they share the messaging of one party.
Right.
And I think we are able to provide the counter to that.
What was something you remember from your past, or either at Carolina Journal or other places, where you sort of realized the importance and the power of journalism?
On September 11th, I was working at Reuters television just off of K Street on L, if you know much about DC. And I had just dropped my kids off at daycare, toddlers, and got to my desk just in time to see the second plane hit. Reuters had its New York offices in the Trade Center towers.
Whoa, okay.
And so they were in the process of moving out because they had purchased property elsewhere. But we became the hub for North America on 9/11, whatever we were, 12 people, 12 people in Washington, D.C. So I spent 3 days literally, sleeping in small spurts on the newsroom floor with a cameraman and, just running the streets and going to the State Department, going to Capitol Hill and, trying to get all these messages. No phones worked. The only thing that worked was those Nextel walkie-talkies that day. So everybody was lining up behind people who had one to try and call their families. My husband's Air Force was based out of the Pentagon. Our children were in Virginia at daycare. It was when I realized that we weren't just commenting on what people are doing in elected office. We really were providing information that was life and death.
Yeah.
That changed the game for me. And then jumping way ahead, COVID. This is the first time I really experienced almost a lockdown of free press was during COVID.
Yeah. I mean, how do you kind of explain that? Because it seems like a lot of media organizations were just kind of in lockstep with each other on what they were reporting. And
I think that it was a cultural thing in that those who were making those decisions and in those newsrooms, one, didn't want to be liable for their reporters getting sick at the time, not knowing what was coming or not coming. But I also think that they were very much driven by fear, like everyone else, and it takes courage, and it takes a lot of investigative work to raise the questions that needed to come up. We were at the time, it made it easy because the state government could say, okay, nobody can come to the press conference. You're only allowed to join by web. Well, that made it easy to shut down the free press and stop them from asking questions. Now we know what was happening at the highest levels in social media campaigns and platforms that were pressing down anybody who asked questions. But what we really saw was the digital removal of the public soapbox. And that is alarming to me, and we're seeing it in our workday during that time.
Yeah, the same. They did the same with all the local city council meetings.
Sure.
Everything got put online.
Made it easy for the government to control the media.
So Donna, we're almost over at Randy's Pizza. You do like pizza, right?
Oh yeah, okay. I'm in. I am in.
And do you have a favorite type of pizza?
I like the veggie ones. The ones are like a salad glued down with cheese.
Yeah.
I like those.
So Donna, thanks for joining us here. We're at Randy's Pizza in Raleigh. So we were in the car. You were talking a little bit about the relationship with the press, to the sort of things you need to keep a free press, and we might take that a little bit for granted here in the U.S. Because some places it's not necessarily a given that you even have what you need to have a free press.
Sure.
Right. And you talked a little bit about that before.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing is economic freedom, and that's key to everything. But a free press is one of them. Economic freedom and a free press are inextricably intertwined. It's difficult. You can have one without the other. Look at Singapore. Probably would be an example, not a free press, but thriving economically. But for our purposes, we're living in a time where poverty and disease and sickness are really starting to recede, and a lot of that is because of economic freedom. It's because we're able to have advances in medicine, and people are able to in increasing numbers able to control their own destiny with economics. But with that means better Wi-Fi, better internet, better sources of information, but it also economic freedom and a free press means a competitive marketplace for media, for news, for ideas. And those two things just go together. And you see when one drops, the other does too.
Yeah, and you kind of talked about that too, about the changes happening. We have a free market. Everything is sort of there's no ad revenue in print newspapers anymore, so that's going to affect things. But maybe there's subscription fees and stuff like that. And so, do you see that there's a place shaping up where people are finding their news that's maybe different than today? I
think so. I mean, I think it's always, the internet's going to be a wild west for a little bit longer, I think, as people sort it out. But in the long run, I think more information is better, more sources of news is better. I'm a little alarmed. There are states, I think Colorado is one of them, that are starting to license journalists. And that is alarming to me because, just like you would an electrician or, whatever, a teacher, they're starting to license journalists, and that means that there's an approval process run by the government, and that frightens me. And you see that in other parts of the world, not here, but we are starting to see it in some of the far left states it's happening. So I'm keeping a close lookout for that, because we do have a little bit of that here in that the Capitol press corps is very controlled by just a few people. In terms of
only certain people have access to the certain government.
That's exactly right. In the legislature, the governor can easily say who can and can't come, or just not send the announcement out, which he does. So I think there's always going to be a level of government control over media. It's just learning how to get around it. And I think our current leadership in the General Assembly is really good at making sure more have access to it. They've started holding press conferences and comments out in front of the red steps instead of always being in the press room where not everybody can see it. So those kind of things make a difference. But when you look worldwide, economic freedom is critical to it, because the role of the press is a watchdog, right? It can really root out some corruption just by being the nature of being a free press, and that's the best interest of the people, certainly the taxpayers, of course. But there's lots of places where that isn't the case. The United States, there's a group called Freedom House, and they create a free press index every year, and they rank all the countries in the world based on how free their press is. And the United States dropped to 45th.
Wow.
And some of that is because of safety reasons. There were 2 journalists that were killed at the southern border in the last year, and I think that impacted its ranking. So the United States went from green for free press to yellow just in the last few years.
Was it just that, or?
I think there's a few things. I think COVID did a lot to hurt it, because journalists felt like they didn't have access to the information they needed during COVID, and that impacted it a lot.
Oh yeah, the same stuff you talked about, where journalists couldn't access the proceedings of government bodies and stuff like that.
Exactly. They couldn't access. They didn't feel like they were getting a straight story from the CDC and from state governments on why schools were shut down, things like that. So that impacted our ranking. And when you lay over the Free Press Index with Heritage Foundation Economic Freedom Index, it looks very similar. So those places that are more economically free actually have a freer press too.
Would you say it's like one thing brings the other, or they kind of go hand in hand?
I don't know. I mean, that's the thing. It's a chicken and an egg, right? Is a free press creating economic freedom because people know more, they can vote their pocketbooks to a degree? Or is economic freedom giving them more access to information, more technology, more phones, more free time to take in the news? I don't know. But I do think that they definitely go hand in hand.
Yeah, because the more access you have to information, obviously entrepreneurial people will be able to, make money with that, make good decisions with that. And sort of the same thing goes with the government, right? Like if you have access to government information, you can make better decisions about who to vote for and stuff like that. Yeah, that's really cool stuff.
It is.
Very cool. So people talk about free press, and I think generally everybody understands what that means. But for you, like, what are the important pieces that go into what we think of as a free press?
Right. I think primarily I would say number one, and it's probably the most glaring example, would be safety. Right? Is the press able to cover stories without fear of being arrested or beaten up by members of the government? Right. And that's the things that we think about as the first line. What we saw happen in Tiananmen Square and things like that. But I think the real rubber meets the road impact is actually in much more subtle, particularly here.
With the cancel culture, people putting out people's addresses.
That's a good example, doxing. Exactly. Putting out the addresses of journalists who say something you don't like, or a columnist, or even a songwriter.
You're not scared of getting shot and killed, but you're scared of people harassing your family.
That's exactly right. And we're seeing that happening more and more, particularly with social media. And it's like boiling a lobster too. You just decide it's not going to be worth the hassle to cover this because it's not really that important, but it may be important. You're like, I don't want to deal with it, because you're going to get harassed, you're going to get blown up on Twitter or whatever. And there are reporters that are like, I'm not going to mess with it. But that is censoring, and it is, and it's a story that's important to somebody, or else they wouldn't go after you. And that's the thing. You only get flack when you're over the target. We see that every day in Carolina Journal, because we get heat for just about everything we do, no matter how small it is.
Well, it's funny, is even local stuff, there's like business interests, there's all kinds of people who have a stake in this, in the way things are going, those cozy relationships, stuff like that. So you uncover a lot of weird stuff when you start just sort of.
And some of it it's frightening even to us. We see even the simplest things like mishandling or not being good stewards of taxpayer resources.
Right.
That doesn't seem like a big deal, but it is, because down the road, something isn't getting funded because something else did. And those kind of things we will have to watch closely. We have things like open records laws. That's an important piece of that watchdog role that the media has, us and everyone else too. We can't get access to records and emails and all the things that our elected officials are doing on our behalf, on our dime, then we really can't do our jobs.
Right. No, that's very important. What else is there? Is there anything else that's really
I think legal protections, one of the things that's come up a lot is naming sources. If someone says something and is an unnamed source, we struggle with that a lot, and I think all newsrooms do. How do we confirm, triple confirm, because everybody has an agenda, even a source. So knowing exactly how to frame a story, to know it's accurate, and to know that we have the protection to not reveal our sources, that's got to be built into the infrastructure of the judicial system and the legal system. Here I feel like we have that. In other parts of the world, we really don't see it as much. There's not those built-in protections. But really, safety is number one. And I'm worried about that. I worry about that all the time. We've had times where we've had to lock our offices, turn off all the lights.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. Because we've had people who seem unhinged blowing us up on social media looking for our addresses. That's happened.
Crazy.
It's happened in my neighborhood. People will.
What was the story you guys wrote, or was it a particular event?
It was actually when Moms for Liberty was kicked out of the restaurant downtown Raleigh. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Some supporters of the cause, some anti-Moms for Liberty groups were harassing us on social media and threatening.
That's crazy. And you just wrote a story about what happened.
Yeah, it was actually a very simple one. It was one story. So we just circled the wagons and made sure that everybody got walked to their cars. You just never know. You never know what's going to happen.
We talked a little bit about international and national situation. What about North Carolina? What do you know about how if any trends or anything like that in media here?
Yeah, I think one of the good things about North Carolina is that we're a great example of what we've been talking about, that economic freedom creates an environment where a free press can really thrive and grow. We've had 10 years of good economic growth. We're seeing more and more people move here, and that's created a competitive marketplace for news. And Carolina Journal is an important part of that. There have been more and more groups added to that network, but the downside of that is, since 2010, North Carolina has lost 300 news outlets.
Wow.
Primarily in more rural areas, which is why we try to make sure that we can reach news from those areas, because that's really the heart, the foundation of North Carolina. Right now, there's only about 14 statewide news outlets.
Okay.
That's not much. We've got 10 million people here, and we only have 14 news outlets that are statewide.
Yeah, and if you're losing local outlets, a statewide papers or news organization is all that's going to be able to fill in the blanks for them, right?
That's exactly right. And some of these, community news is coming from, a board of commissioners or a town council, and that means that it's being controlled by those elected officials. Not necessarily a bad thing, but having an independent press is really an important piece of a successful formula for a free press. So North Carolina is a good example, just like in many other cases, very urban with a rapidly growing industry for press, but then challenges faced in these more rural areas. So, I love working here. This is, my husband and I have raised our children here because it is such a fantastic place to live. And regardless of where people are on the political spectrum, everybody loves being here, and they want us to be the best place for future generations.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that we got to get back to, is just like everybody's on the same side. Everybody wants this to be the best state, the best country, et cetera, et cetera. And then it's really just cool to see how your organization helps make sure that happens. And again, Donna, thank you so much for having pizza with us, and we learned so much today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. This is so good.
Yeah, you take it home.
For daily coverage of North Carolina politics and news, visit carolinajournal.com. And thanks for watching Policy Pizza. And don't forget to subscribe to the John Locke Foundation on YouTube.